So this is what I'm here to offer today, and I'm really grateful for this space. Many of you know what Transfer Gallery is all about. Many of you don't also. So I am going to take just a moment to share some of my background, so it gives you more context also as we go into this history and some of the patterns and ways forward that maybe we can discuss. So Transfer Gallery, this is going to be very quick also. Transfer.gallery, if you want to look at it online, at Transfer Gallery on every platform. It started in Brooklyn in a physical space. This was a boarded up portal when I moved into the gallery, so it was very hands-on from the beginning. And the special thing about Transfer Gallery is it really changed with every exhibition, and this exhibition design was a very hands-on, intimate process with one artist at a time, really giving over the space to develop the work away from the screen and bring it into contact with viewers in new ways. And this is stuff that I touched from start to finish, even getting on the ladders to install these kinds of things. So that was the physical space in Transfer in Brooklyn for 6 years. In that time, I also started to do things like this, which represent sort of software and affordance development to support new kinds of exhibition design and partnerships with institutions like the Toma Foundation, which is a great collection of media art. So what does it mean for a gallery to be commissioned by an institution to do exhibition design? But some of these ideas are, just simple about new ways of thinking about accessing art. So this is a traveling catalog. You walk into the room and pick up the iPad, and on the iPad you have sort of a remote control, and it's 12 different artists in this case, with information about each artwork, and you select one from the list, and the entire room changes over to play that work. So it's this sort of hyper-layered catalog. And that led me to also thinking about new institutional models. This is an image of the current museum, thecurrent.art, if you want to look at that online. And this was about creating salon happenings, bringing people together, and also creating a new sense of stewardship and care for the work. So one of the special things we did here was experiment with storage and ideas of decentralized storage. So what would it mean for a patron to actually store the collection in their home on a network-attached storage drive and have a personal relationship to care? I then also moved to LA and opened a space in downtown LA. This was about, again, bringing people together over dinner and to spend time with time-based media art. A lot of these exhibitions were works that were for free online to the public, but also found value in supporting in the gallery. And this was all sort of pre-NFT. Since then, I've been virtual, and now I'm very happy to be in a new role in collaboration with BetaWorks, helping to shape a new organization called EAT Works, which I'm going to give you some historical context for and then tell you a little more about at the end. So this is a beautiful event space in New York City in the meatpacking, and we had our first salon during NFT NYC, brought people together for reflections on the history of art, also had some demonstrations about performance, this in the case of John F. Simon Jr. here, performing Block Party, which is a physical analog of an online net art piece that was restored by the organization. And in this photo, it's so special. There, leaning across the table from John F. Simon Jr. is Julie Martin, who is one of the seminal figures in the experiments in art and technology. And it's sort of this layering of generations that's happening, which is so needed in this space. So I'm going to jump into the first patch, which is looking at the past. This is a book called Technocrats of the Imagination. Anyone who works in media art, I would highly recommend this book. It's completely changed my perspective on what we do. And one of the things, I don't know how, yeah, I guess it is pretty visible up here. One of the things that really struck me early on in this book is this image, which is some strategic thinking about the direction of the collections at Moma. And you see this sort of model here, which very clearly illustrates the ties to culture and the military-industrial complex, which sort of begin with this narrative. That's kind of where we're going to start and pick up in history today. And this book really does a really thorough job of dissecting some of these dynamics of power and tracing them throughout, specifically the early developments in art and technology. And the other thing that this book really articulates well is the lineage that actually begins with the Bauhaus, as they sort of embrace industry, focusing on craft and production, right? This approach to design that unifies the principles of mass production with individual artistic vision, and strove to combine aesthetics with everyday function. So that sort of sets off this lineage, which then is traced through activities at Black Mountain when members of the Bauhaus come over to the US, and you sort of see this propeller model, this sort of warhead of culture, articulating also that sort of state-oriented view. And it traces then through CAVS, which is a program at MIT, which is focused on artistic creation above intellectual property or software. And there's a lot of sort of struggle, and it's a somewhat short-lived program, as is most of what I'm going to be sharing in the history today. Failure is the most prevalent pattern in the history of art and technology, and we're going to talk a lot about that. Yeah, then we move through to experiments in art and technology, and then LACMA has a program on the West Coast, also art and technology early on in the history. And this book examines from all sorts of perspectives this idea that threads throughout that art can kind of save us in some way, right? Like art is used time and time again to justify or bring in a humanistic softness or some kind of virtue to really destructive technologies and ways of thinking. So that was a really sort of quick introduction to the part of the history that we're going to focus on, which is the experiments in the art and technology. It was founded in 1967 by Robert Rauschenberg and Robert Whitman, together with Bell Labs engineers Billy Kluver and Fred Wallhauer. And it was really born of this idea that art and industry could learn a lot from each other, and that artists could play an important role in helping us understand how new technologies were poised to transform our modern life. Engineers could gain a better understanding of how their interventions would impact society. So this is a really sort of utopian ideal, as you can see in some of the text here. So one of the things EAT did really early on was publish these sort of pamphlets. This is the rear cover of one of those editions. And this utopian ideal was really about interdisciplinary collaboration somehow leading us to positive social change. And actually one of the things that's so interesting is Billy Kluver, who's the main engineer you see here, was really thinking that ultimate success of the experiments in art and technology would see a disillusion into these sort of autonomous, I'm using my own language now, but autonomous units, right? Where these collaborations could really scale and replicate in new kinds of ways. So it's really interesting how even from early on, this sense of decentralized economies was part of how the history of art and technology emerged. So the very first sort of seminal act of the experiments in art and technology was the 9 evenings, theater and engineering, which brought together 10 artists and more than 40 engineers and scientists from Bell Labs to develop new performances, immersive experiences, and interactive installations. And they actually developed this exhibition over the course of 9 months. So all those folks were collaborating together for a very long period of time to bring together a sort of full exhibition installation. This is the Regiment Armory in New York. It's still available as a venue, and some interesting other things have happened there throughout history. And essentially what happened is this culminated in 9 evenings of performances. So it ran for 9 evenings in a row, and every night the same performance was reperformed, it was iterated on, it changed, it evolved, and more audiences came through. And that sort of sense of doing it out in the open, or having that sort of sense of iteration or durational experience with these kind of experimental types of artwork was really core to the idea. It attracted more than 10,000 visitors and changed every night. So some of the artists that are included are very well known, but it wasn't just artists, right? So there were dancers that were a part of it, Deborah Hay, Yvonne Rayner, Lucinda Childs, and Steve Paxton. There were also musicians. John Cage did some of his first performances to very large audiences here, David Tudor, artists Rauschenberg, Fallstorm, Alex Hay, and Robert Whitman. And they created, as you can see from the photo in the center here, this sort of vast, maze-like, open area for exploration, which included different stages and happenings and performances throughout. And it was very vast and confusing. And if you read a lot of the accounts of this stuff, people talk about how they're not really sure. There's this sort of sense of openness or ambivalence in the way that you enter into the space and how you might interact with some of these artworks. And so it was generally regarded as a failure at the time, and largely sort of panned by audiences and critics alike. So the critic Clive Barnes wrote in the New York Times, the level of technology was such that the performance started 40 minutes late, a 15-minute intermission lasted 35 minutes, and a loudspeaker announcement was so indistinct on the apparently unsound sound equipment that it became unintelligible. So ultimately it was a sad failure, a limp disaster. So, you know, despite the unpopularity at the time, this is sort of the seminal moment in art and technology that sets off so many different things that lead us to where we are today and what brings us here today. And so there's a sense that maybe even failed experiments are useful as they produce new knowledge. So, you know, despite all of the malfunctions and idiosyncrasies, the experiments in art and technology continue, and it really launches a movement in art and tech collaboration. So one of the first things EAT goes on to do is set up a matchmaking program between artists and engineers. They host information sessions, they do knowledge exchange, tech demos, training sessions, and sort of shaping local chapters in different cities. Again, you see so many similarities as we start to look back at this history and we think about FWB cities and the way we are choosing to organize now, and look at the way all of these creative technologists and engineers did that 60 years ago. What might we learn if we look a little bit further into this, right? And so in New York, they started to take offices, and they began to host artists also in the Murray Hill Labs. So Billy Kluver's kind of, you know, he's really into the art scene, he's hanging out downtown, going to the galleries, going into the studios, and then bringing the artists over into the site of industry as well, into the labs. So there's this real sort of jam space that's emerging, and just scene and subculture around this. So in September 1969, EAT reported a total membership of 2,500 artists and 2,000 engineers, which included members of affiliate and local groups in 17 areas in the US and 9 abroad. At that time, EAT reported that over 600 collaborations had been initiated through the matching service since the start of that. So I think it's really special to look at some of these artifacts also, these punch cards. This is an earlier version, but they iterate to be sort of very elaborative, breaking down different specialties and disciplines, material sciences, and artists being able to sort of select from the punch card what they're interested in, and doing a sort of automated matching. So in addition to art, EAT also helped with projects outside in the world. So city agriculture was one of such projects. They proposed using closed environment agricultural systems for developing agriculture in urban areas. And then the other here is Children in Communication, in which artists are providing technologies to kids for play and exploration in that way. Robert Whitman designed 2 environments for that project where children could experiment with communications equipment. So this was really part of EAT's broader vision for bringing art and technology to benefit and create a common good by directly becoming involved in projects of social concern. So this is definitely a central component to what EAT is also exploring. So as we move through this early technology, we start to see many, many other initiatives that are working in the same space emerging. So programs like LACMA's Art and Tech Initiative followed EAT, and major exhibitions like Cybernetic Serendipity at the ICA in London, that was in 1968. Software at the Jewish Museum in New York City in 1970. And new cultural institutions also emerging in this time, like the Kitchen. That's an institution that continues today and has really vibrant programming with a lot of artists who are also working with new technologies and new forms of performance. Also, Ars Electronica in Austria in 1979, EarCam at the Centre Pompidou in 1977, ZCam in Germany in 1989, and many others. We're going to dig into that a little bit in the next section as well. So, over the last 6 years, a whole lot has happened in the world of art and tech. This is really just the beginning, what I've run you through here. And there's so much more to go into, more than we have time here today. And also, not a lot of scholarship and work has been done around this. So if you're curious, you can really make a big impact by reading some of this stuff, thinking about it, sharing it. And yeah, hopefully we can dig more into that in future talks. So for the next part, I want to zoom into sort of what's happened since EAT, so from the 1970s until now. In a way, yesterday Toby's talk was a concentrated part of that, maybe towards the 2010s. But I think what I want to share out loud now and hopefully speak to you all about later in the fest are some of the patterns and challenges that emerge through this history, and how we find similarities in those and what we might do differently to move forward. So again, failure is sort of at the center here as we come out of EAT. And Robert Smithson famously writes a description of the 9 evenings, which I want to share with you. And I want to because, the Smithson's perspective really represents one version of the art world at that point, looking at art and technology and what's emerging and starting to create this separation. So Smithson says, art's latest derangement at the 25th Armory seemed like the funeral of technology. Everything electrical and mechanical was buried under various aesthetic mutations. The energy of technology was smothered and dimmed. Noise and static opened up the negative dimensions. The audience steeped in agitated stagnation, conditioned by simulated action, and generally turned on were turned off. This, at least, was a victory for art. And so this, I think, for me, it still feels like the kinds of thing that would happen when I would go to the NADA showing a website, right, in an art fair that's meant for paintings, and having this kind of inherent separation between some of these principles of the scarcity in the art world and what this emergent moment looks like and represents. So failure also, the artwork was hard to maintain and the technology didn't work right. One of the meanings in theater, in the title, 9 Evenings, Theater and Engineering, is that a lot of the algorithmic output they were trying to invent for the artwork. For example, famously there's a piece where lights strobe on and off, and this was meant to run with an algorithm, with an early code-based backing switchboard. But instead they actually had people plugging and unplugging lights to actually perform that effect of the work. So there were these kinds of failures all around that were then being performed by the humans. And this still happens, right? Like in my gallery to show an animated GIF, which is a web native object, right? It's actually quite hard to make sure you have a web browser running and you get the GIF at the right scale. Much easier is to just create a screen recording and a movie and put that in and perform that format as an installation. So there are always, and there always will be, these kind of dissonant things you run up against as you think about technology in the physical space, just given the nature of it. Then the other thing that was sort of the center of failure, and we see this a lot throughout this history between 1970s and now as well, the artist's goal is to misuse technology, right? It's a subversive outcome. So when we think about industry and what drives industry and revenue and positive outcomes, right, a subversive outcome does not align to those goals. So from the start, the way that these explorations are entered into are fundamentally quite different. And we still really struggle with that and what that means today. And so the one thing that was really special about the 9 evenings originally is that the industry orientation was in support of art, right? So it was the dancers, the musicians, and the artists. And then there was a whole team of engineers supporting those visions. So whatever the artists, and famously also the collaborations in EAT were like this too. The artist would put something on the punch card like, I want to make clouds. Famously, that was one from Andy Warhol. And then engineers would work together with him to figure out what that meant, how to make clouds. So it's these studio-driven outcomes, it's these imaginative outcomes, it's these non-commercial outcomes which are driving the exploration, and it opens up a space for kind of invention, which really then changed culture. So it was considered a failure by some at the time, but the ideas really shaped art and culture for generations to come. And this was really, I think, the key orientation as I was reading this that stuck out, because as we see the history immediately after the 9 evenings, it's the other way around. Artists start to go into the site of industry. They're brought into the labs. They're brought into, now in the 2000s, 2010s, corporations, and they're corporate artists, and they're making art for corporate spaces. And so, you know, what's happened between then and now, throughout a really rich history, right? This is a super abbreviated timeline, just as like full disclosure. These are a few of the highlights from my perspective. There is so much more here. And there's also not really been a holistic understanding of how this has developed over time. But it's really interesting to see these early institutions formed in the 1970s, which still exist today. And really were at the forefront of thinking about this stuff. The EAI there on the left, I just want to highlight that one. That's the Electronic Arts Intermix. It was formed in the 70s by a gallerist called Howard Wise. And Howard's gallery was all about exploring television as a new medium for reaching new kinds of audiences. And the Electronic Arts Intermix was formed with this idea that now art could reach everyone, and there would be a whole sort of new way to support artists and to distribute artwork and video artwork. And you can, again, hear a lot of resonances in the things that Howard was thinking with television and the way we think and talk about NFTs and social, sort of smart contracts in this moment. And that organization has continued to play a very important role in the history of art and technology through today. They have some of the most significant archives of sort of historic work, but also contemporary artists. And they do distribution in different ways. So as an educator, you can subscribe. There are also other support models that EAI offers. And then it moves through kind of the 80s, where some of these research institutions are really leading the way, and the programs are being explored in that context. Through to the 90s, that's actually just a Jody artwork, but it's meant to represent the emergence of net art, obviously, which is vast and expansive, and cannot even be represented on a slide. ZKM, which is a great institution, is also founded at that time. Further Field in London, and then some collections in the 90s, like the Toma Foundation. I believe the Stoshek collection is from around that time. The Kremlik Art Collection, these great sort of patrons of media art emerge in the 90s, and it starts to find some institutional support, but still largely outside of the system of contemporary art, into the aughts and the 2010s. We see Rhizome, 7 on 7, a real literal pairing of artists and engineers in that. And so thinking about how through these early experiments, we see this expansive technology. I did a workshop recently. I'm just going to throw this up to give you an idea. Like, there's so much more there. This is not meant to be comprehensive in any way. But as we trace this, I think what's also interesting is there are so many sub-histories and related histories. And there's a very sort of organic map that might emerge from that. It's something that I'm really interested in pursuing in my projects. And then we arrive at our moment here with NFTs. Right? This is Beeple's every day if you don't recognize it. And we're in a moment where art has completely now been put in the service of industry, right? We are designing currencies, and that is sort of the context through which we also serve corporate interests like metaverse platforms, social media. Our identities are on all of these platforms. So we are somehow in a complete reversal of where we started. And I think it's time to turn that back and take that back. I've been spending a lot of time looking at the landscape. So this is a kind of crazy Miro board that I've been developing with the Department of Decentralization, which is a collaborative based out in Berlin. And we're just looking at the space and trying to break down and trace culture in the space. This is also has not been updated in about 3 months, so there's definitely stuff missing because it just changes every day. But I think we are, here today at Friends with Benefits Fest, and in this post-NFT moment, or NFT, I guess, is still happening. Is it happening? I hope not. Anyway, so we're here because over the last 2 years, we've seen an explosion in this interest in art and tech. And that's thanks in large part to the new marketplace for digital art created by NFTs. And I think there are definitely amazing potentials for these technologies and these toolkits. Decentralized protocols have amazing potentials for us, right? Authenticating provenance, facilitating collective ownership and governance, sharing and distributing value. These are all things that are very valuable. And this art scene has really been, unfortunately though, developing in a vacuum. And in our desire to do things differently, we have attempted to sever ties with the past. And that's definitely a theme in this discourse, right? And I think when we look around what we have right now, we have a very volatile market, and it changes a lot, and our emotions go up and down with it, and our lives also. We have NFT time, which is a very unhealthy way of producing and living. We seem to be replicating a lot of the same hierarchies that we claim to be separating ourselves from. Gatekeepers, centralizations of power that we saw in the traditional art world. And we're not focusing on context meaning, art history, stewardship, and appreciating art for more than its ability to generate us revenue and returns. So this idea of patching the present is trying to bring forward some of the learnings into today. And so part 3, patch 3, is the prototype. So I'm going to talk now more about what I'm working on and some of the ways that trying to form hypotheses that can be designed against, created against, collaborated against to bring forward new ideas. Right, so these are some of the structures that I'm working on now with an organization called EAT Works. That's eatworks.xyz if you're interested in looking it up. And it is very much a continuation of the original experiments in art and technology that we were just sharing and going through the history together. We have been spending time with Julie Martin and thinking about what was really effective in the original experiments and what we want to bring into this moment. And matchmaking has become a real central point. After spending more time with Julie, she got out all the punch cards, talked about the experiences and what worked, also talked about what didn't work. And we really feel like we're in a position to leverage some of these toolkits which exist, and maybe even go back in time and think about tracing and connecting a lot of what's happened throughout time. So that's really the first point here. Focusing on studio-driven outcomes, trying to, again, reverse this relationship between art and industry. As Toby's talk kind of really brought to home yesterday, we're steeped in it. We can't get out of it. We need to react to it. We need to react within it. And I think that hopefully that's what we can help explore as well, ways to do that. The other thing that I'm really keen on is looking closer at that history and connecting the organizations that exist in that space who have been carrying art and technology through for the past 60 years. A lot of these are nonprofit organizations, they're local organizations, they're education oriented to university, research organizations. So what would it mean to connect all of that knowledge across those sort of histories? Also creating new behaviors around NFTs. It's amazing that so many people now are thinking about art and technology, care about art and technology. What are the good behaviors there that we want to encourage and see more of in the world? What are the ones we can maybe set aside, can maybe create alternatives to? And so we're really focused on thinking about NFTs in different ways. And also inviting patrons and organizations to share equity. So a lot of the work that I've done at Transfer Gallery, specifically since NFTs have come about, is focused on solidarity economy models and what it might mean to redistribute wealth for a community of artists in a very intentional way. And I think that the more we create networks of artists and organizations and define those values, those are the pillars we need to really start to shape how we want to engage in this space. And I do think that artists hold all the power in this moment. So hopefully we can orient an organization and a way of thinking around that. We are going to be exhibiting the outcomes to the public. So thinking about how we bring people together in space. Would be so cool to do something the scale of the original 9 evenings, bringing together a community of artists, thinking about time in a different way. And then continuing with the decentralized storage model. This is something that I believe is one of the most tangible applications of blockchain for digital art, media art. We are facing obsolescence right now. It's happening right now. It's been happening. The potentials of decentralized storage could help us preserve our cultural legacy in a new way. And I'm happy to talk to anyone who's curious about that at length, because I think it's one of the only things when I ask, do we really need a blockchain for that? I think decentralized storage is one of those things that can really help us out. So just to close out the talk, I want to bring it into kind of 3 pillars of how I'm thinking about my practice right now. So the first is reflection, and I'm thinking a lot about how we can honor what came before us in every act of creation. So one of the very tangible examples here is I'm on the Art Blocks curation committee. I just joined there. And I find it really interesting the way that artists talk about their work, and those who reference what came before, or at least the style or the framing in which they're producing in, I find can carry through ideas aesthetically in a much stronger way. And so it's acts like that of honoring the context of what came before that I think we can all do and embrace with more intention. Also thinking about how we can dig into the past and shine on new untold stories. So, you know, EAT is often credited with Billy Kluver and Robert Rauschenberg, as I did earlier, but Julie Martin is actually, you know, from the beginning, the editor of the EAT newsletter, hands-on behind the scenes, doing everything to power that organization, to power that sort of moment in history. And there are so many untold stories. Julie has thankfully gotten so much good recognition in the past few years. But there are many, many stories woven in throughout those histories. And those folks are still with us, and it's time to sort of reflect and focus and spend time on that and energy. So, you know, I find a very simple act for anyone who's thinking about the context of their NFT platform or any kind of art-adjacent business to think about ways to invest in the past and reflect on the past. And yeah, that's the last point, is just how can we deepen our relationship with the present by looking into the past. And I think I at least move differently through the world when I have a lot more context about what came right before me, and I start to see connections and patterns in ways that I didn't before. So then the other pillar is matchmaking. I love this idea in so many different ways. A great gallerist once was telling me about what it means to sell a work of art, and it's sort of like falling in love, watching someone fall in love and making that match. So it's an analogy I've been thinking about for a long time, and to bring the softness to sort of the historical matchmaking, which was this punch card system. So thinking about how can we really facilitate collaboration in different ways. Where are the gaps that still exist now in those collaborative structures? And they've become even more entwined with capital and complex. So it might take a little rewinding to really dig into that stuff. But what are those gaps, and how can we make matches to help, again, facilitate across those gaps? And what are the real needs in the artist's studio? So when we strip away kind of the way that all our traditional documents, commission agreements, exhibition agreements, funding models, the way those work now, that sort of influences the way an artist might articulate their need in relation to what they think can be given to them. But if we strip away all of that, what does an artist really need in this moment to produce? What are the things that are really crucial to giving them the space to take their ideas forward? I'm also specifically interested in scale and what happens when artists find resources to put studio-driven outcomes into the world at scale. And so, yeah, digging into those needs, making matches across those needs. And then thinking about how we can leverage the unique affordances of this moment. So blockchain and other sorts of technologies, public ledger technologies, to iterate on that punch card network to facilitate matchmaking. And then the last is stewardship. So these are the ideas that I really care about, and they're the tough ones, and they're the ones that also cost money and will never make money, but will make history, right? So what are the ways in which we care for culture? If we each think about that individually, what are the ways we care for and invest in culture? What does that represent in our lives? How much are we investing in culture as opposed to luxury goods or other sorts of indulgences in the way that we live our lives? What kind of value do we get from those investments or the ways that we care for culture? And what do we want our cultural legacy to be? Crypto dick butts? I don't think so. Like, can we actually think about the implications of this right now and come together and start to articulate values in a way that can help move forward what our cultural legacy might represent? And also, what is our engagement with specifically the near history of this moment? So the artists who are maybe crossover, who have been a part of this history of art and technology and have taken the leap into this new moment. How can we think about that context? And what types of engagement do we have? And how can we go back in time? And yeah, the last point is just thinking about finding new ways to support this work together, to care for all of this work. I'm going to end the talk now with an invitation. So the organization EAT Works, we're starting membership. Has nothing to do with money. So you become a member by participating. So we're thinking about participation and what values represented in participation. So come to an event, you become a member. All of you in this auditorium right now, and those of you listening as well, are invited to become a member by just referencing this talk. You heard a little bit of the history. You have performed mental activity around something we care deeply about. Thank you for that effort. We invite you in. And when you're a member, you get to participate in developing ideas. So we do virtual studio visits where our members are invited to listen in and also be a part of those conversations. We also invite matches for our artists into those visits, so you can kind of see that happening in real time, the industry coming together to support art in new ways, experts of all type offering their expertise. We also then will have sort of channels that unfold around those visits. Our first one is coming up in August, so you're at the very beginning of this new cycle of membership. And the channels will be topic-oriented. So if you're an artist and you're working with a specific tool or technology, you want to find either resources to help you with that, or folks who are thinking about similar issues or challenges in their work. So it'll be very tactically oriented in the way that the punch cards were historically. And that's going to be based for now around a Discord. So members will have access to that. Also matchmaking. So if you have a project that's a work in progress, and you want support in some way, as an artist, you can submit that work in progress, and we'll consider it for our matchmaking seasons. If you have a resource, or you're building a product or a company or a tool, or you are just a technologist who wants to spend more time with artists and thinking about ideas, we also invite our members to submit resources they might have, and then we can facilitate those matches. And yeah, the next studio visit is in August, eatworks.xyz if you're interested in that. And we will have a physical salon for our members in mid-October as well, this fall, at the Betaworks space in New York City. So here's my contact information. Feel free to email me if you'd like to become a member, Kelani@eatworks.xyz. And those are the socials also for the other stuff I shared. Thank you all again for your time this morning.